Hey guys, what's happening? Thanks for tuning in, coming back, watching, hanging out, all that stuff. You know, I appreciate it. Hope your day's going well. Hope you're staying safe and healthy and that sort of thing. This is another episode in my little mini series I'm making around things you can, some editing things you can do in isolation, what I call the Isolation Editing Challenge. And if you're new here, I make videos about a lot of different photo processing kind of things. Just try to simplify and remove some of the complexity from these tools, because you can make a lot of great things out of these tools if you understand how to use them. And that's what I'm here to try to help you do. So with that in mind, I'm in Luminar 4 today. And what I'm doing is I'm taking a shot that's really not much of a shot. And my intent here is to turn it into a work of art. A little bit painterly, a little bit, I don't know, kind of painterly, I guess, for lack of a better word. So here's the photo. This was something I took up in the Texas Hill Country a number of years ago. If you've watched any of these, you can tell I'm kind of going through some old photos. I still have new photos, like from Iceland and places to go edit, but I want to focus on things that are a little bit older and try to share some ideas and tips and tricks for you to keep you occupied while we're all at home during this isolation kind of thing that's happening. Anyway, so it's just a barn at this like farm thing up in the Texas Hill Country. It's not really an exciting shot, but I wanted to make it kind of artistic and turn it into something fun. Plus, I just kind of like barns, and so I kind of like this shot, so I took it. Anyway, that's my base photo, and that's what I turned it into. I did a lot of things here, so what I'm going to do is reset all the filters, and then we're going to dive into that and have a lot of fun. So let's get going. Okay, here I am on the base layer. There's the unedited photo. I have done a few things in the light tool, which is where I generally start. That's what it looks like with the adjustments I made here in light. Did a tiny bit of temperature and tint, did some smart contrast, pulled down the highlights. Very simple. I mean, straightforward, simple stuff, just from there to there. And I got to be honest, like, I didn't know, I didn't have a vision for this photo. I'd love to tell you that I have these brilliant ideas, and sometimes I have some ideas and I go figure out how to make it happen. This was not one of those times. This was just Jim screwing around, which I highly encourage you to do. That's how I learn the tool. That's how I come up with stuff, is I just get in there and just say, I wonder if I can do this or do that, or I try this and it doesn't work, and then I try this and it does work, or whatever. So in other words, experiment, experiment, experiment. So that's what I was doing here. First, I used the light tool and really got a base image, but like I said, I didn't know where I was going with it. Next up was AI Enhance, and as you can see here, I used some AI Accent and some Sky Enhancer, and it really does pop the photo. I mean, I love these two sliders in this AI Enhance tool, because I went from that to that very quickly, and I think it makes a huge impact on the photo. Does a great job of rearranging the light and popping the colors, and I think it looks great. And I was actually pretty happy with the photo already at this point, having really not done very much to it. Now, the next thing I had in mind was I wanted to do some color shifting around the leaves. I took this in the fall, but being Central Texas, which is where I shot this, still a lot of green. We don't have a big fall season, so I have to fake it half the time when the mood hits me, if you will. So I did that in the color filter, and as you can see, I made a lot of the greens kind of orange. So let me show you how you do that. Here's a little tip. Go into advanced settings, and I started in the green, and what I did is I took the hue all the way to the left and gave it a little bump of saturation, and then I went into the yellow. As I said in previous videos, yellow is a big component in green. And so I went and took the same thing with the green, with the yellow. I took the hue all the way to the left to make it as yellow as possible, which is kind of the same thing I'm doing over here. Basically with the green, if you go to the right, you're getting more blue, but if you go to the left, you're getting more green. And then when you do the same thing with the yellow, you're getting more to the yellow, and I bumped up the saturation. And those two changes, basically, because I didn't do anything to the oranges, and yeah, I didn't do anything to the reds either. All I did is move the saturation and the hue for the green and the yellow sliders over here in the advanced settings in the color tool. And if you look at the tree over here, and the haze picked up a little bit of orange as well, which is actually okay with me, even though theoretically it should be a little bit more yellow. But primarily this tree up front, the leaves really got orange on me, which I think looked great. So there's the before. The leaves, to me, the green, it's too close to the blue in the sky, and it's too, kind of is hidden, for lack of a better word, with the texture and stuff in the barn. But when you do that, I think it really pops. So that's a little trick to help you convert an image that may be basically like a summer or an early fall image to something that looks a lot more that autumn season. That's how I do that. Next up, I went to Landscape Enhancer and just gave it a little golden hour across the whole photo. Just kind of warmed it up a little bit. It brightens it a little bit. And of course, it really makes those oranges and reds kind of pop, which is really what I was doing, just kind of emphasizing that fall look. And that was actually my intent. I told you I didn't have an intent. I had a little bit of an intent with the photo, and that was to make it kind of a fall kind of image. Because to me, like a barn with hay in it, it just kind of makes me think of fall. And so I wanted to kind of accentuate that mood, and that's kind of how I got to this point. And honestly, I thought I might be done here, but of course I wanted to keep experimenting and see if I could come up with something different or fun or unique for you, and that's how I got into that final result. So let me just keep going. The next thing was I wanted to do a little something over here in the sky, so I went into the augmented sky filter and just added birds 3. I like the birds 3 a lot. It kind of fit for me up there, and of course, you hit place object, it usually drops it in the center. I had to drag it over there. There's not really a lot of sky, certainly not very much sky that's clear, but I feel like the birds kind of fit in there, so I went for that. And then I did, let's see, I believe I went to mystical. Yeah, a little bit of mystical. As you can see here, amount 27, so not a lot. It adds a little bit more shadow like around that dark part in the barn, but that was a very simple kind of approach there. Just a little bit of mystical just to give it a little bit of kick. Okay, then I popped over to portrait and added a little bit of Orton, same kind of thing. Between mystical and Orton, I tend to use them both often at the same time, and so just a little bit more of that kind of romantic moodiness. It adds some nice soft light, it kind of softens the image, adds a little bit of shadow. I don't know, it creates a little bit of a glow to the photo in my opinion, and I really like it. So there's the before and the after. Not a big difference, but subtle, but I liked it, so I just stuck with it. Okay, and the last thing was I went over to Color Enhancer on the Pro tab, and you can see I did a little bit of brilliance and warmth here just to pop them, and I think I did a little bit down here, shadows, highlights, midtones. A little bit of color adjustment in the midtones, so you can see the color kind of popping overall. Let me show you a Color Enhancer. Here's before. I mean, fairly vibrant from the other things that I've done on this layer, but now a little bit. I actually brought up some of the blues, and I think the oranges and reds are popping a little bit more. Anyway, that's where I was on the base layer, and at this point I was like, I like the photo. I like the photo, but what else can I do? And that's when I decided to get another layer and start experimenting. So I went and added, you just go to the layers up here in the top right corner where it says layers, hit plus, and I chose add new adjustment layer. And that's this one here. Let me go ahead and turn that on. Now the first thing I did is I went over here and hit the light tool again. And basically I just brought down the highlights. So I felt like it was getting a little bit bright in the highlights, so I wanted to get that under control. I didn't do anything in advanced settings, but this was really just controlling the highlights. Next up was the color tool again, and this was really just a saturation and vibrance reduction, very slight. But at this point, I was like, all right, the colors are getting a little intense, even for me, and I love my big colors, but I just decided to pull that down a little bit just to, again, I wasn't exactly sure where I was going with the image, but I didn't want to oversaturate it and make it completely over the top. So the next thing I did is actually added a vignette. And it's not a ton, but I went in, I did a little less roundness, so more of a kind of oval shape and very high feathering. Did a little bit of inner light and, a decent sized vignette, but basically just went from that to that. So a little darker around the edges, of course, that's what a vignette is, and a little brighter in the center of the image, which is kind of, I left it straight up in the center. I didn't place the center anywhere else. So it's really focused in on here, but I wanted to add that little bit of brightness. And you can really tell, I mean, if you look at it there, before the vignette filter and after, I definitely think that inner brightness makes an impact. Okay, and at this point, this is where I said, time to experiment, Jim, find something fun and exciting. So I went to texture overlay, and I just added another texture. I did this in a previous video, one from what's called the Bisbee Texture Collection. You can see it on being on the photo there, and by a photographer named Ann McKinnell. I'll try to remember to put a link down below. It's a wonderful texture set. It's like 10 textures. I can't remember. I think $10. Well worth it in my opinion. I just hit load texture, and that is not it. Let me find those. Okay, here it is, and I think it was Bisbee 2, which is just this. They're like these pastel color, like watercolor, not watercolor, oil painting. I don't know what they are, but I don't know what you call it. But they're just interesting textures that have a lot of great color. Two things I really like in a photo. So I added that, but I did it a little bit differently, and that is I went into Edit Mask and I chose Luminosity Mask. So let me show you. You have to click on Brush to show the mask. Let me show you. So you can see how it applied. I mean, it's still fairly heavy, but that's how I applied it with a luminosity mask. And then I left the blend mode at normal, and I took the opacity down to 43. So I think it defaults to 50. Let me hit yeah, it defaults to 50. I brought it down to 43, just slightly reduced it, but it was also slightly reduced because I used a luminosity mask to apply the texture. So just trying creative things. I didn't want to just slap the texture on. I wanted to see how the luminosity mask impacted it, and I thought it looked pretty good. And this is when I was like, okay, I'm kind of making this an art piece as opposed to just a straight up, here's a shot of a barn that I made look like fall. I decided, all right, I'm going to explore kind of the more creative aspects here. And so I felt like texture overlay really got me to that next step. And then just kind of being interested in that creative thing, I liked it, but it seemed a little bit muted. Even though it's got a lot of color in it, the texture kind of fades it out a little bit. It seems a little muted, like I said. So I said, what can I do? And I decided to go at a preset. So I just went, or a look, I guess they're called now. I went and got one of my own from my London Calling pack. And I just stuck that on there directly. And as you can see, there it is. It's a bit brighter and punchier. And so I just added a new adjustment layer. And in looks, I went over here to my London Calling set. And I grabbed this one called Scotney Castle. And I stuck that on there. And you can get those on my blog if you're interested. They were made in Luminar 3, but they work fine in Luminar 4. It's a number of different enhancements, including some stuff, clarity and tone that show up in the deprecated filter, but it's got color enhancement, adjustable gradient, AI enhance, and color. But I stuck that on there. However, what I did not mask it, but I dropped the adjustment amount to 18. So if you come in at 100 with that preset or that look, it looks like that. And so I knew when I put it on there, I was like, God, that's just horrible. That's terrible. I don't want to even look at it. But I thought, hey, if I drag that down, I'm going to get some of the color punch and some of the impact without all the sort of cartoonish colors. And so one more time, let me turn this layer off so you can see before. There it is, a little bit more muted without that preset or look added. And there it is with it. And so even though the adjustment amount is only 18 and fairly reduced, I think it's still having a nice impact on the image. And at that point, I thought I was done, but I said, I'm going to do one more thing, and that is I went over here and I decided to get another texture. So I added a new adjustment layer, just say plus, add new adjustment layer. Let me turn that on. And I just popped over here to texture overlay, and let me turn that on. And the texture I loaded this time, let me show you. Just click on load texture, and I found this grunge paper texture with coffee stains, something or another, on the web years ago somewhere. I don't even know where I got it, but I got it. And I stuck it on, and once again, in this case, I did a luminosity mask. So let me show you that. I'm going to click on brush so I can show you the mask. And you can see the luminosity mask, how that applied on the photo. And then I also changed the blend mode to overlay, and I left the opacity at 50. So I basically just took that coffee stained photo as another texture, stuck it on with an opacity with a luminosity mask, left the opacity at 50, but I used the overlay blend mode, which changes how this layer interacts with the layers below it. So it gave me that final look. And that's really the whole image. That was me just kind of experimenting with textures and masking and sticking some birds in the sky, and a lot of color work and sort of faking the fall look, if you will, for lack of a better word. So there it is, the base photo, simple barn, kind of a lot of green, kind of blue, and now turned it more into a kind of a painterly look with a sort of that pastel texture from the Anne McKinnell Bisbee texture collection. Augmented sky with the birds, which is minor but still fun. Color shift around the trees and the leaves to create more of that fall look. And then another texture, which was that coffee stained paper, which, I don't know, it just felt like it went. I kind of like how that texture works along with the other texture, and I felt like it made a big difference in the photo, having the two textures on there. So not my traditional edit, but nonetheless, we all have a lot of photos that you might deem like a throwaway shot. I mean, let's be honest, this is a photo of a barn. It's not particularly exciting. Like if there's a cowboy on a horse, or, working or whatever, something that like added an element of more interest to it, that'd be great. But this is in some ways like a still life. I mean, you got a wagon, you got a wheelbarrow with an electrical cord on. It's not particularly exciting. To be honest, I just like barns. My mother grew up on a farm, and we used to visit up in North Carolina, and I'd get in the barn all the time and play. So I guess it reminds me of childhood. Anyway, I like barns, so I took a picture of it, but it's a photo I was like, I'm not really ever going to do anything with it. But I did do something with it, and I turned it into a kind of a work of art. And that's my challenge to you this week, or this time, I should say. That's just something to think about. Try textures, try different masking techniques, try color shifts by using the sliders and the color tool, and just experiment, have fun, and just do something different. See what you can come up with. Feel free to tag me when you post your photos, if you do post them. And thanks for watching, my friends. Hope this gave you some ideas, maybe inspired you to try something. But most of all, thanks for watching. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you soon. All right? Have a great day. Take care, and adios.